Now we come to Hermine Tobolowsky. Hermine Tobolowsky turns out to have been more of a rival than anything else with the women I've just described. Hermine Tobolowsky was somebody who, like Raggio, always felt like an outsider. She was Jewish. She was from South Texas. She ends up in Dallas. She, too, was somebody whose parents always told her, you can do anything you want. You're smart, you'll go far. Her father, in particular, had said to her as a little girl, never, ever count on a man. Always make sure you can take care of yourself. Her dad owned a whole chain of retail stores, and he'd seen really distressing things happen with women who had run up bills, whose husbands wouldn't pay them, and so on. So he always told her, you make sure you take care of yourself. Don't count on a man. She ends up marrying somebody who worked in retail, just like Dad. Her husband was a big fan. He thought that she was incredibly smart. He married her because they spent their whole first date talking about politics and international relations. He actually proposed at the end of the first date. And she said, oh, come on. She made him wait a few months. And he's like, but I'll never be bored if I marry you. Please marry me. So they got married. They moved to Dallas. She is also involved in the Texas Federation of Business and Professional Women. And if you're wondering about this theme of what is it with the BPW, a lawyer who wanted to make connections, which is good for business if you're a lawyer, would join the BPW. Because then you'd have all of these people who, if they ever needed a lawyer, they'd say, oh, I know this lawyer from the club I'm in. And they'd pick up the phone and call you, and you'd have a job or some work. So she becomes a lawyer. She tried the piecemeal legal reform approach that Raggio favored. She tried it. But the state legislators were so abusive, so rude, so insulting when she tried to get a law passed to reform married women's property rights, that she was furious when it was over. And she said, that's it, they're getting a constitutional amendment. So she got the Texas BPW behind her, and from 1957 until the 1970s, they blanketed the state with an informational campaign, speeches, pamphlets, newsletters, trying to persuade everyone we need a Texas state equal legal rights amendment. She came up with all kinds of strategies for how to pitch the message to different groups. She tended to sound critical of the civil rights movement at the time, in the 1950s. She tended to say, unlike some groups who have to go to the federal government and beg for things to be changed, we can go right to our Texas legislators and we know they'll do right by us. We're not crying to the federal government for help. And I've thought about that a lot. Why did she do that? And I really think for her it was a strategy. She may have been truly conservative and perhaps dismissive of the civil rights movement, but she was trying to play to the state legislators' attitudes of wanting to control politics, wanting not to have the federal government intervene and tell them what they had to do. And so she had tailored this message. She had another speech that was entirely for all male audiences, where she would say, we need the state equal legal rights amendment so that businessmen can sue women. She would pitch it that, if you were a businessman, you needed this. It would help you. She thought that anybody who tried to argue for more rights for women in a divisive way that came off as anti-family or anti-male, that they were doing things wrong. She always had a very conservative approach. She had an anti-communist kind of conservative way of being in politics. And I do suspect it's because she was Jewish, and she did not want to be somehow labeled as a Jewish radical, not in Texas. That would not help her. So she ends up deciding constitutional amendments are the way to go. And she works very hard on the Texas Equal Legal Rights Amendment, that campaign. And she ends up, after many attempts, finally in 1971, getting the state legislature to pass it. In November of 72, the voters approve it, and Texas has a state ERA. And in the interim, in March of 72, Texas was asked, do you want to ratify the federal ERA? Here it is. Texas, like I said, was one of 3 southern states that said yes, and it was the only one that never backed away from that. And so I do think that this entire almost century of activism on the part of women's rights by these 3 different activists who were connected, whether through mentorship or rivalry, the fact that they had similar networks of people that they could use, they all make a contribution, they all succeed at making politics different. And so to wrap up, I hope that you can see from what I told you that Texas feminism did continue to exist between that first wave and that second wave. There is continuity there, right? And we can also see that they were divided over what strategy to use. Should it be piecemeal legal reform? Should it be to get women elected to office? Should it be to focus on constitutional amendments? They didn't necessarily agree, and that was much the same nationwide, if you look at what other states were up to. Sarah Hughes' career shows us how important it was to work on trying to get women elected to public office. That was her strategy. Party politics, public office, get women involved, get women in that political arena, get women fighting the political fight. Tobolowsky and Raggio, they believed in being a lot more traditional, kind of packaging things in a way that wasn't quite so confrontational or explicit about wanting to be just like men. They were much more concerned with coming off as ladylike or kind of managing what people thought about their activism. All 3 of them argued that that greater gender equality would benefit not just women, but that it would benefit men as well. And that seems to be a strategy that worked really, really well in Texas. And that all 3 kind of would raise their eyebrows over when they saw elsewhere women's rights activists sounding stridently anti-male or anti-family. All 3 of them would say, they're not going to get very far with that. And so they really emphasized gender equality as something that benefited both sexes. Thank you.